Victor Sanov and you are watching A News. Let's see the top stories. Israel attacks targets in Gaza amid ceasefire collapse. Palestinian health authorities report hundreds killed in the airstrikes. United States has intensified its military operations in Yemen, launching new airstrikes on Houthi-controlled areas. European Union and its partners pledged 5.8 billion euros for Syria and its neighbors. Israel says it has launched its most intense airstrikes on Gaza since January's ceasefire, carrying out at least 35 strikes overnight. Palestinian health officials reported more than 300 people have been killed, with dozens more injured.
Israel's military confirms it conducted extensive strikes across the Gaza Strip, targeting what it calls terror sites linked to Hamas. According to the Palestinian Civil Emergency Service, at least 35 Israeli airstrikes have hit multiple locations. Palestinian health officials report hundreds of people have been killed, with dozens more injured. This is the largest wave of airstrikes in Gaza since the ceasefire on the 19th of January.
Almost the entire family was martyred, all of them in pieces, and our house collapsed on us. Our house is directly next to theirs. There are also injuries at the Satari house. They are still pulling people out from under the rubble. We were sleeping just before Suhoor, and the house almost fell on us.
The White House confirmed on Monday that Israeli officials consulted with US President Donald Trump before launching the latest military operation in Gaza. Israel blames Hamas for refusing to release hostages and warns of acting with increasing military strength against the group. In response, Hamas has accused Israel of violating the ceasefire agreement. It's leaving the fate of 59 hostages still held in Gaza uncertain. Hamas released 33 hostages in exchange for nearly 2,000 prisoners since the first stage of a ceasefire began in January. Talks for a second phase to release 60 hostages and end the war have stalled. US proposes extending the ceasefire, but both sides remain deadlocked over key demands. Mediators from the US, Egypt and Qatar are still working to revive negotiations. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is threatening to resume the war and cut off food and aid deliveries to Gaza. Hamas says it will only release hostages if Israel lifts its blockade, withdraws from a strategic corridor and frees more Palestinian prisoners. So far, the war has claimed more than 48,000 Palestinian lives, according to Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry. However, more than 1,200 people were killed during the attack by Hamas on the 7th of October in 2023, when 251 hostages were taken.
5 senior Hamas members, including Major General Mahmoud Abu Watwa, were reportedly killed in overnight Israeli strikes on Gaza, according to Palestinian officials. Abu Watwa served as the Undersecretary of Gaza's Interior Ministry and was responsible for Hamas internal security forces. He had previously vowed to strengthen Hamas control over the Strip. Tel Aviv says the strikes are in response to Hamas' refusal to release hostages, while Hamas says Israel has overturned the ceasefire agreement. The United States has intensified its military operations in Yemen, launching new airstrikes on Houthi-controlled areas in Hodeidah. The attacks come amid rising tensions, with the Houthis vowing retaliation and threatening U.S. military assets. Meanwhile, mass protests have been erupted in Yemen's capital, Sana'a, as thousands rally against U.S. intervention.
The US military has escalated its campaign in Yemen, launching a new series of airstrikes targeting key Houthi-controlled infrastructure overnight. No immediate reports of casualties or the full extent of the damage have been confirmed. US Central Command has released footage showing fighter jets launched from an aircraft carrier, though the date and location of the footage remain unverified. In a televised address, Houthi leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi threatened further escalation, including attacks on US aircraft carriers, calling them American aggression. Houthi military spokesman Yahya Saraya later claimed, without evidence, that the group was responsible for a third attack on an American aircraft carrier group within 48 hours, stating they struck the carrier twice in 24 hours. It came after large-scale US strikes ordered by President Donald Trump last week, targeted Iran-aligned Houthi forces in response to their attacks on Red Sea shipping. The Houthi-run health ministry reported dozens killed, including women and children. Pentagon has not verified these numbers, confirming only dozens of military casualties. As tensions escalate, thousands of Yemenis gathered in Sana'a on Monday, protesting against US airstrikes. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump issued a warning to Iran, accusing Tehran of backing the Houthis and declaring that any Houthi attack would be seen as Iranian aggression. Since November 20th to 23rd, the Houthis have launched more than 100 attacks on Red Sea shipping, claiming solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza. These attacks have severely disrupted global trade, forcing companies to reroute vessels around Africa. In response, the US and its allies, including the UK and Israel, have intensified strikes on Houthi positions.
US President Donald Trump has said that he will hold a phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Tuesday to discuss a ceasefire in Ukraine. Kremlin also confirmed the call is scheduled to take place. For more on that, we go to Washington and our Ubi Shbander.
A phone call between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian leader Vladimir Putin is in the works for this week. President Trump said that he intends to speak to Putin about the U.S. attempt to broker a 30-day ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia as a first step towards ending Europe's largest and deadliest war since the Second World War. After a bit of prodding from Washington, Ukraine has agreed to Trump's ceasefire plan. But the Kremlin has signaled its trepidation and reportedly has conditions that it would like to impose on any deal. Trump's special envoy and close confidant Steve Witkoff met with Putin for hours last week in Moscow and took back a letter from Putin addressed to President Trump. Trump told reporters this weekend that he thinks that there is a very good chance to bring the war to an end and that negotiations with the Russians will include potential land concessions by the Ukrainians. The Russian military has captured approximately 20% of Ukraine's territory, and hundreds of thousands of soldiers have been killed and wounded on both sides. Special Envoy Witkoff has said that the U.S. goal is to narrow the differences that remain between Kyiv and Moscow, and that President Trump is directly involved in pushing for a diplomatic solution to the conflict. Trump's national security advisor Mike Waltz recently said that the Trump administration is seeking, quote, a permanent peace with a European-led security for Ukraine. Ube Shabander, A News, Washington, D.C.
Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has chosen to make his first overseas visit to Europe rather than the United States. Instead of heading to Washington, Carney traveled to Paris and London, meeting with key European leaders.
Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney met with the leaders of Britain and France on Monday during his first overseas trip since taking office. His decision to visit Paris and London, rather than Washington, marks a departure from the usual tradition for Canadian leaders. The move follows heightened trade tensions between Canada and the United States, with President Donald Trump floating threats of annexing Canada and imposing additional economic pressure. Carney met with French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris before heading off to London to meet with King Charles and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Carney, a former central banker, took the helm of Canada's ruling Liberal Party this month by presenting himself as an outsider with crisis management expertise. He argued he was best placed to oversee trade negotiations with Trump, who has threatened additional crippling tariffs on Canada and frequently muses about making the country the 51st US state. In London, Carney did not hold back in responding to Trump's statements about Canada's status.
We've called out those comments. They're disrespectful, they're not helpful, and they need to stop before, and they will have to stop before we sit down and have a conversation about our broader partnership with the United States.
Despite these strong words, Carney has yet to speak directly with Trump, and the US president has remained silent on the new Canadian leader's appointment. Carney's visit was met with support by French and British leaders, who also discussed ending the war between Russia and Ukraine.
The European Union has pledged 5.8 billion euros to Syria and the region. It's after the EU hosted its 9th annual conference aimed at gathering aid for the country as it faces dire humanitarian challenges and an uncertain political transition. For the first time, Syrian authorities were represented at the Brussels event, marking a possible shift in international engagement. The European Union and its partners have pledged a total of 5.8 billion euros in aid for Syria and its neighboring countries. The announcement was made by the EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas. She made the comment at the one-day conference, which saw ministers and representatives from Arab and Western countries, as well as United Nations agencies participate. And it was the first time a Syrian government representative attended. Interim Foreign Minister Assad al-Shibani was present, signaling a potential shift in the way the international community engages with the Syrian authorities. European Commissioner for the Mediterranean, Dubravka Šuica, says she hopes the funds will help the beginning of the country's recovery process.
We just closed the Syrian pledging conference. This was 9th conference in a row. It was very successful. We pledged a lot of money. Better to say it is 5.8 billion euro, out of which there is 4.2 in grants and only 1.6 in loans. I think this is good for the recovery, for the early recovery of Syria, and I also hope that Syrian authorities, who were represented by their Minister of Foreign Affairs, can be satisfied, and this money could and should be used for their early recovery and for the benefit of all Syrian citizens.
After 14 years of civil war, the financial aid hopes to help those who displaced. At the moment, there are around 7 million people displaced in Syria, according to the UN Refugee Agency. And there are more than 4.7 million Syrian refugees registered in Turkey, Lebanon and Jordan. The EU launched its Rearm Europe initiative aimed at strengthening the bloc's military capabilities and reducing reliance on the United States. The plan to mobilize some 800 billion euros in defense spending was unveiled by the European Commission chief, who warned that Europe is facing a clear and present danger. Here is what the plan is about.
In early March, the European Union announced a sweeping defense initiative known as Rearm Europe, a plan to boost military capabilities across the bloc.
We all want a peaceful...
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen unveiled the strategy, citing growing security threats from Russia, uncertainty over US commitments, and the prolonged war in Ukraine. The plan involves investing up to 800 billion euros in air defense systems, munitions, cyber defenses, drones, and security reinforcements along the Russian and Belarusian borders. A key feature is a 150 billion euro joint borrowing scheme, which even traditionally reluctant nations like the Netherlands have supported. The remaining 650 billion euros would come from easing EU fiscal rules, allowing member states to increase defense spending despite budget deficit limits. However, experts warn that the plan faces serious challenges. The EU lacks a unified defense structure, and bureaucratic delays could slow implementation. Financially, Europe is already grappling with economic stagnation and rising populism, raising concerns over how the massive spending will be funded. Critics argue that redirecting resources from social and infrastructure programs to military investments could spark public backlash. Meanwhile, discussions are also intensifying around seizing Russia's frozen assets in European banks, estimated at 300 billion euros. While some EU leaders initially opposed confiscation due to legal and economic risks, recent reports suggest France, Germany, and the UK are now exploring mechanisms to use these funds for Ukraine's military and reconstruction efforts. Beyond Ukraine, Rearm Europe signals a shift toward greater military independence for the EU. With NATO's future uncertain, some EU leaders believe the bloc must develop its own defence capabilities. France, in particular, is pushing for the initiative and could use it to expand European support for Armenia's military.
The French government has been found guilty of negligence over the use of a banned pesticide in its Caribbean territories. The Paris Court of Appeal has upheld the ruling, confirming that authorities failed to prevent, assess or mitigate the impact of chlordecone, a toxic chemical linked to serious health risks.
In a landmark decision on March 11, 2025, the Paris Administrative Appeal Court upheld a ruling that found the French government guilty of negligence for permitting the use of the banned pesticide chlordecone in the Caribbean islands of Guadeloupe and Martinique. The case originated from a 2020 lawsuit filed by approximately 1,300 residents of these islands, each seeking €15,000 in damages for prolonged exposure to chlordecone since 1972. Despite its known dangers, chlordecone was legally marketed in France from 1981 until 1990. Notably, its application continued in Guadeloupe and Martinique until 1993 under a government exemption aimed at combating the banana weevil, a pest affecting banana plantations. The court criticised the French government for authorising the sale of chlordecone-based insecticides, allowing their prolonged use. This negligence has led to widespread contamination of soil, drinking water and marine areas in both islands. Health concerns are significant, with more than 90% of adults in these territories exposed to chlordecone. French officials have expressed concerns about potential links between chlordecone exposure and high rates of prostate cancer in these populations. Some studies have also suggested a possible association with premature births. The court's ruling mandates financial compensation for individuals who can demonstrate actual exposure and resulting anxiety. On Tuesday, compensation was awarded to 10 individuals who provided sufficient evidence, such as blood tests and, where necessary, soil analyses to establish actual exposure to pollution. This decision marks a significant step toward acknowledging and addressing the long-term health and environmental impacts of chlordecone use in these French Caribbean territories. The ruling has been met with a mix of relief and ongoing concern among residents and environmental advocates as efforts continue to mitigate the pesticide's enduring effects.
At least 7 people have died after a plane crashed just off the Caribbean coast of Honduras on Monday night. 10 others have been pulled out of the wreckage. The accident happened just minutes after it took off from Roatán Island, about 1 meter from the island's coast on its way to the Honduran mainland. The Jetstream aircraft was carrying 14 passengers and 3 crew members. According to the flight manifest shown by local media, the passengers included a U.S. national, a French national, and 2 minors. Afghanistan approved a $10 million plan to combat climate change. This initiative holds the potential to bring meaningful change, not only in protecting Afghanistan's environment, but also in improving the livelihoods of local communities. Our Tamim Bahis reports from Kabul.
Afghanistan is taking a major step in the fight against climate change. The National Environmental Protection Agency has approved a $10 million project to help communities adapt to extreme weather conditions. The initiative is funded by the Global Environment Facility, which includes $1 million from the UN Development Programme. Over the next 5 years, the project will be implemented in Badakhshan and Kunar, 2 provinces highly vulnerable to climate change. The focus is on building resilience and improving livelihoods. Key initiatives include climate-resilient farming and land restoration, afforestation and sustainable natural resource management, improved irrigation systems such as check dams and drip irrigation, expansion of grazing lands, and the introduction of drought-resistant crops. A NEPA representative called this initiative a crucial step in addressing climate change and conserving natural resources. Afghanistan is among the most vulnerable countries to climate change, ranking 4th in crisis risk and 8th in climate vulnerability. with 60% of the population dependent on rain-fed agriculture. Unpredictable rainfall and droughts are worsening food insecurity and malnutrition. While challenges remain, this initiative offers hope. With the right support, Afghanistan can build a more resilient future for its people and the environment. This is Tamim Bahis in Kabul for A News.
Big changes could be coming to tech giant Intel. The company's incoming CEO, Lip-Bu Tan, is reportedly considering a major shakeup in its chip manufacturing and artificial intelligence strategies. According to sources, Tan is set to return to Intel on Tuesday in a sweeping bid to revive the struggling company. Intel's incoming CEO Lip-Bu Tan is reportedly considering significant changes to its chip manufacturing methods and artificial intelligence strategies. That's according to sources familiar with the matter. It comes ahead of his return to the company on Tuesday in a sweeping bid to revive the ailing tech giant. The new trajectory includes restructuring the company's approach to artificial intelligence, as well as staff cuts to address what Tan views as a slow-moving and bloated middle management layer. At a recent town hall meeting, sources say he emphasized the need for tough decisions to steer Intel back on course. Tan, the former CEO of chip design software firm Cadence, previously served on Intel's board before stepping down last August. Now he's stepping in at a crucial moment as the company struggles to regain its footing after years of missed opportunities. Intel has fallen behind key rivals like Nvidia and ARM in the AI chip market, and its failure to break into smartphone chips has left it lagging in an evolving industry. The company posted a staggering $19 billion loss last year, its first annual loss since 1986. NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams are finally heading home after spending 9 unexpected months aboard the International Space Station. They departed the ISS early Tuesday aboard a SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule. Wilmore and Williams, along with two other astronauts, undocked, beginning a 17-hour journey back to Earth. Their return is scheduled for a splashdown of Florida's coast at 6 p.m. ET. Upon landing, Wilmore and Williams will have spent 286 days in space, well beyond the usual 6-month mission, but still short of the U.S. record set by astronaut Frank Rubio, who spent 371 days in orbit due to a spacecraft malfunction. Astronomers warn that a major industrial project in Chile could jeopardize advanced space observations. The European Southern Observatory says that plans for an INA electrical complex may increase light pollution and disrupt conditions at the Paranal Observatory.
A large-scale electrical power complex in Chile could severely impact astronomical observations at the country's Paranal Observatory. The European Southern Observatory warns that light pollution from an INNA industrial project could rise by at least 35%, while air turbulence from wind turbines could degrade viewing conditions by up to 40%. There are flawless trails of stars and comets that can be seen at night in hills near the city of Antofagasta. ESO say they would like to protect these clear skies for vital astronomical research.
Several fundamental elements risk our ability to continue operating and constructing mega astronomical projects here in Chile. The first is related to light pollution. Having a large industrial project near the observatories would increase light pollution to levels that make it impossible to continue, where we aim to reach the universe's limits.
Experts say the dark skies of Chile are the darkest and clearest for observation in the world. The Antofagasta region is also home to the $1.5 billion extremely large telescope currently under construction. It's hoped it will be finished by the end of the decade, and it will be the most powerful to have been built. The energy company AES claim they're committed to the highest environmental standards and also say the power project runs parallel with the country's green hydrogen targets. A 60-day public consultation will end on the 3rd of April.
That's all for now. Thank you for joining us and stay tuned for more updates.